Chapter 11. Cara snickered as Amber ran back and forth, pushing the button on the water cannons. Jade was in the fort, firing back. A gasp escaped her when a spray of water hit her. "Hey, I'm the captain," Cara called down to her daughter. "I'm not supposed to get hit." "Mommy, pirate!" Jade squealed, pushing the button again. Cara tried to dodge the huge ball of water, but Jade must have hit the button again to send the big shots out. She hurried over to help Amber, who was pushing the button on her cannon over and over. It took a moment for Cara to realize there were more cannons firing than Jade could have done alone. "Ahoy, matey!" Cara yelled. "Who be helping the landlubber?" Cara's breath caught in her throat as Traylon slowly rose up on the top level of the fort. A huge grin lit his face, and fierce determination glittered in his eyes as he stared back at her. She pulled the patch covering her eye up so that it rested on her head. "You found us," Cara grinned with a happy smile. "I plan to capture you as well," Traylon yelled back with a mischievous laugh. "I'll take you to my dungeon and have my wicked way with you. Jade, fire!" Cara squealed and ducked as Jade laid on the button, this time sending wave after wave of water at them. Amber, not to be outdone, crawled up on the cannon she was using and sat on the button. "I think I need to fix that," Cara muttered as warm water poured over her, soaking her to the skin. She jumped when a pair of boots landed a few feet from her. Rising up, she drew her fake sword and pointed it at Traylon. Pushing her red hair out of her eyes, she glared at him with suspicion. "You used your dragon to get up here, didn't you?" she demanded. She watched uneasily as Traylon tossed the soft sword he had found between his hands with the experience of a warrior who had spent centuries practicing. Twirling it, he held it out in front of him with a satisfied grin. Her eyes flickered to Amber, who had shifted into her dragon as Jade landed behind her dad. "That's not fair," she grumbled. "A good warrior never fights fair," Traylon replied in a husky voice as his eyes took in the soaked white shirt of Cara's outfit. The water had made it transparent, and the dark circles of her areolas were clearly visible. "Especially when he sees something that he wants." Cara glanced down, puzzled by what held Traylon's interest. Seeing her shirt plastered to her body and her nipples hardened by the colder air of the cavern, she scowled. She felt them harden even more when she looked back into his eyes. "Never," she declared defiantly. "I am the pirate Cara. I will fight to the end or walk the plank." Traylon's eyes brightened at the challenge. "Oh, I really hope you fight, and the only plank you'll be walking is my cock." "Traylon," Cara hissed as her eyes darted to the girls who were wrestling on the netting. "They'll hear you." "Then perhaps we should take this fight further away if you don't want them to see more," Traylon replied. "Simba, you were in charge of the girls." The golden symbiote, which had been perched up on the crow's nest, glided down to land next to where the girls were now crawling up the netted climbing ropes. Traylon ignored everything but the small, delicate, intensely amazing woman in front of him. Every time he thought he knew her, she continued to surprise him. "I want you, Cara," Traylon declared in a thick voice. "I mean to have you." Cara's eyes widened in surprise and nervousness at Traylon's suddenly rough, possessive tone. Swallowing, she moved backwards as he advanced. Squaring her shoulders, she raised her sword and attacked. The soft thump as the foam swords hit was deceptive. Each opponent wore a look of fierce determination on each of their faces as they circled each other. Traylon blocked her attacks, parrying and returning with an ease that told Cara she was vastly outclassed when it came to sword fighting. She squeaked when he took control of the battle. Turning, she ran down the stairs and opened the door leading down to the lower sections of the ship. She turned in the narrow corridor, heading for the captain's cabin. She slammed the door as he followed her. Rushing forward, she turned as the door slammed back against the wall. Gulping at the dangerous glow in his eyes, she put the long table in the center of the room between them. "Traylon?" she whispered as he came forward with slow, determined steps. "Traylon?" "Give up, Captain Cara," Traylon ordered in a low, dangerous tone filled with thick desire. "Give yourself to me." Never, Cara whispered back as he kept coming toward her. Jerking to one side, she tried to keep the table between them. It looked like it was going to work until he jumped onto it. Panic set in, and Cara decided retreat was a highly underused plan in most battles. She dropped her sword and ran for the door. A startled cry escaped her when he reached it before she did. Turning, she trembled when he caught her around the neck and turned her toward him. "Surrender to me," he ordered again, in a husky voice burning with desire. I surrender, Cara said, as she stared into his eyes. Her arms wound around his neck as he dropped his sword and wound his other hand around her waist. The heat of his body seared her as he kissed her with a passion, with a hunger that left her gasping for breath. She ran her lips desperately over his jaw as her fingers worked the fastenings on his shirt. "I need you, Traylon," Cara whispered between kisses. Traylon broke long enough to glance at the bed. "Is that real?" he demanded, turning to look back at her. "It is that or the table." "It's real," she said with a laugh. "I tried to keep things authentic." Traylon gripped the front of her shirt and ripped it open. "Then so will I," he muttered, capturing her lips again as his hands cupped her breasts. "I need to roleplay more often," Cara thought, as pleasure exploded inside her and she felt her body being lifted. Arosa sat petting Simba as they watched Amber and Jade playing. She sighed as she thought of all the fun they were having. The innocence of the young always made her glow with warmth. "Sister," Arilla murmured as she appeared next to Arosa. "Arilla," Arosa smiled. "Uh-oh, they see us now." Jade saw them first and squealed in delight as she half-crawled, half-rolled down the net. Amber sat up, blinking when Jade suddenly disappeared before she realized why and followed her. Arosa opened her arms to Jade while Arilla opened hers for Amber. They hugged and cradled the girls, who babbled for several minutes before snuggling closer. In less than 5 minutes, both girls were sound asleep. "Once they stop, they sleep," Arosa chuckled. Arilla nodded before she sighed. "Ekaterina is back. She asked me to find you." "Is she upset?" Arosa asked as she cradled Jade protectively against her. "No, I am not upset with you," Ekaterina replied as she suddenly appeared beside them. "It is hard to remain detached from this species," she said softly as she brushed a tender hand over Amber's flushed cheek. "There is something very endearing about them." "Yes," Arilla whispered. "Even I find it difficult to remain untouched," Ekaterina added with a small, secretive smile. "What do you mean?" Arosa asked, looking at Ekaterina with a curious expression. "Perhaps, every once in a while, we can right a wrong that has been done, or offer guidance," Ekaterina said, rising. "Or protection?" Arosa added under her breath as she thought of the young human woman she had left on the unfamiliar moon. "Or offer protection," Ekaterina agreed. "As long as that protection is done with minimal impact to the structure that makes up the universe," she added. Arosa glanced at Arilla and rolled her eyes. She'd seen Cara, Ariel, and Carmen do that frequently and discovered it said a lot without saying anything. Rising up as well, she floated over and laid Jade down in the stroller that Simba had formed when the girls fell asleep. Arilla rose with Amber in her arms and reluctantly laid her down beside her sister. Smoothing a hand over the little Dragonling's hair, she turned to stare out over the world their mother had created. "I don't remember the cavern being this large when we were here," Arilla commented as she studied it. "It wasn't," Ekaterina replied with a mysterious grin. Arosa's light laughter echoed briefly before it faded as she, Arilla, and Ekaterina dissolved into a fine mist of gold. The mist flowed over the side of the pirate ship and into the water below. Following the flow, they traveled outside the palace, where dawn was beginning to break. Reforming on the cliffs overlooking the vast ocean, they watched as the sun rose over the planet they called home. "What happens next?" Arosa asked, as she stood next to Ikaterina. "We watch over them," Ikaterina replied. "The Dragonlings are a lot like their parents. They are very curious." "Where did you go?" Arilla asked, as she stood on the other side of Ikaterina. Ikaterina was silent for several long moments as she watched the beauty of the world that had saved her life explode with color as the sun rose. A sigh of resignation escaped her. They thought of her as a goddess, but she was more like them than they realized. She made mistakes, learned, grew, and craved to be loved just as much as they did. "I had a mistake to correct," Ikaterina whispered in a quiet voice. "What mistake?" Arosa asked, puzzled and surprised. Ikaterina sadly smiled at Arosa. "Even as old as I am, I still make them. There were 2 brothers that were never given a chance at life because of a decision I made," she murmured. "Will they be given a chance this time?" Arilla asked. "I hope so," Ikaterina replied, beginning to fade. "But it still won't be easy," she added with a chuckle. Arilla and Arosa looked at each other before they faded as well. Ikaterina wasn't upset with them, thankfully. Perhaps that meant they could return to the playground again soon.